This conference that we are providing today and hosting today is the latest example of that, and I think you will have an opportunity in this conference to exchange thoughts and ideas and practices and methods with colleagues from all over the country and all over the world. We're very proud to have all of you with us today and hope that you find it to be a productive and professionally fulfilling experience. To start our event off today, we have an exciting keynote speaker, Jim Mahoney, who is Executive Director of Battelle for Kids here in Columbus. He's an experienced educator with many years as superintendent, assistant superintendent, teacher, educator, and well-known speaker and author throughout the United States on subjects related to education. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce to all of you Jim Mahoney.
Thank you, Dr. Decker. It's a real honor and a privilege for me to be here. It's a little different experience not being able to see people directly. I was thinking this morning as I was driving here years ago when I went to Ohio State, some of you will recall in 1968 when they won the national championship, at that Rose Bowl game, Lou Holtz was the defensive coordinator. And O.J. Simpson had a run early in the game where he ran about 80 yards, scored a touchdown, and Coach Hayes was just incensed. And as the story's told by Lou Holtz and others, he screams down on the phone to Lou Holtz, he said, "Why did he get 80 yards?" To which Coach Holtz said, "Well, Coach, that's all he needed." So I thought about, what is it that you need? And then I tried to imagine that if I were a professor, staff member, someone at Franklin, what it is that I might share that might be useful for you. So that's really my charge. When I think of the founder of the Mayo Clinic, they asked Charles Mayo, they said, "What's the best advice you'd give to a new doctor?" And he thought about it for a minute, and he said, "Well, I would tell that doctor, try to imagine you were a patient and ask yourself, well, what kind of doctor would you want? And then try to be that kind of doctor." So I tried to imagine that I worked here and what it is that I might share that might be useful for you. So that's really what I want to do. I want to start with a quote, an illustration, and a story. The quote is this: "The grass isn't greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it." So if you water ideas, you get innovation. If you water growth, you get improvement. If you water relationships, you get collaboration. So you think whatever it is you want, that's what you need to water. Now, the illustration is this. I brought this with me. I have lots of props in my office. I know it's a coconut and it's attached to a rope, but they used these in West Africa. They were monkey traps. And the monkey traps they would tie this rope around a tree. And then he would put nuts and berries in the top of this. And a monkey would come along, and a monkey would stick its hand in there, grasp the nuts and berries. And then, with a fist, it couldn't pull its hand out. Now, whenever its captors would come, do you know how many monkeys would let go of the berries, take their hand out, and take off? Virtually none. That's why it worked. Now, counselors sometimes use this as a metaphor. What are the things we hold on to that we just need to let go of? So let me offer two or three. One is we need to let go of the notion that learning can't be measured. It can't be measured perfectly, but it can be measured, ought to be measured. After all, how do you improve a goal you don't measure? Or worse yet, how do you improve one that you don't have? When I think about other things we need to let go of, no one said this, but frankly, if I think of the little high school that I went to, no one said this, but often we would teach the best and hope for the rest. And the truth of it is we need to teach the rest as if they were the best today, because we need to let go of that notion, because every kid is going to need something to be prepared adequately for the future. So think about the things that you need to let go of as we move into this new era. There's one other one I want to share that I thought of, and this is very powerful. If you've read the work of Carol Dweck, The Growth Mindset, we need to let go of the notion that traits are all fixed, that somebody was born with perseverance, somebody was born with optimism, somebody was born with grit. somebody was born with effort. These are things we can teach. We can teach resilience. So I used to say to kids, your I do is just as important as your IQ. So we need to let go of the notion that these are fixed assets and you're born with them. We now have tons of evidence that we can teach those things, and we know those things contribute to adult success as much as anything. Now, I want to begin. I'll tell lots of stories, but I want to start with this notion. Some of you, I'll bet, have read the book or seen the movie Eat, Pray, Love. Was Elizabeth Gilbert did this wonderful self-deprecating story about finding a love interest in Bali and great food in Italy and a spirituality in India. And as I heard somebody talking about it when it first came out 4 or 5 years ago, I liked the idea of 3 verbs. And that fall, I was getting ready to do a presentation at a school district to start school off, and I started calling some of my teacher friends, and I said, if you had to have 3 verbs that defined your classroom, so at the end of the year, I said, what are your 3 verbs? What would your 3 verbs be? And you had to give me evidence that, in fact, you did that. And the first teacher said something like observe, prepare, excite. I could imagine that. And then I called a second teacher. And they said align, assess, achieve. Now it became a game. I thought, I wonder how many teachers I'm going to have to talk to before they say the same verb. As it turned out in my little experiment, 8 teachers, 24 verbs. The 9th teacher gave me the same verb. And then suddenly it dawned on me, how you see your job is how you do your job. So I would ask you, whether it's your classroom, your department, think about what are your 3 verbs that at the end of the day, when it is over, you want to look back and say, here's what I stood for, here's what I did, here's the evidence. So how you see that really, really matters a great deal. So when you begin to think about this, it frames it. Now, I have to tell you, I started 3 as a power in communication. And I noticed you have a 3 on your building out here. When I was here the last time, and I thought, great communication technique. When I go to Ohio State football games, there's a truck down there that sells pizza. It says order, pay, leave. So 3 is a very powerful communication device. Now, given that, I want to take 3 just for this. And the 3 I want to take for these purposes are going to be this. First of all, I'm going to illustrate. And then I'm going to frame. I'm going to give you something you can use very quickly. And then the last, I want to give you something that provides some inspiration. So I'll say inspire. So let me start with my first one, which is to illustrate. I apologize for walking on and off here. All right. Hopefully I can all see this. Now, I want you to think about fundamentally with teaching. Because the 4 things that I'm going to share have been the bet this country made starting 20 years ago to improve student achievement. But it's a bet that you all wrestle with in your classrooms all the time. So let me start with this. First of all, the bet in this country was to improve student achievement, we need standards. What do we want kids to know and be able to do? Makes sense. You have that in your classrooms. What do you want kids to know and be able to do? What's the purpose here? The second one is instruction, because you can have great standards. I know people who collect great recipes who can't cook too, but having standards is not sufficient. So you need effective instruction. What is it I'm going to do to help kids learn these things, or students of whatever age? Third part in this is assessment. How will I know that they know what I want them to know and can do what I want them to do if I don't assess it? So I assess and intervene and all those things as a result of it. And then the last one is accountability. Who am I going to hold accountable in this drama? Now, the belief in this country in standards-based reform is that if we have high standards, we have effective instruction, we use assessment to improve, calibrate, judge in some cases, all of those things, and hold people accountable, more kids will learn. Now, many would argue that that's exactly what's happened. But along the way, there's been a whole host of other things that have come with that, because it's really not that simple. Let me continue this illustration, because this is the very thing you have to think about in your own classrooms. Let's start with standards. You think, well, that's pretty straightforward. What do we want kids to know and be able to do? I don't even know if I'm sorry. Okay. Thanks, Coach. This way?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, okay. Okay, let's start with the first is that, well, no one's going to argue about standards. Anybody heard Common Core? We're fighting about this all over the country. We're fighting about what should kids know and be able to do. And there's lots of arguments about it for lots of different reasons. So we're involved in a large major discussion. It's going to be part of the presidential campaign in all likelihood. Let's talk about instruction. What is effective instruction? And you think, well, there's great clarity on that. Well, the truth of it is, there isn't great clarity on it. For some, it would say, well, it's absolutely as a result of student performance. We look at student tests. But anybody who's ever taught kids understands that it's so much more than just that. And what is it that makes great instruction in today's environment? I watch my own grandkids, and one of them the other day had an iPad, and I'm watching her, and it goes off, and I didn't know what to do, and she looks at me and she goes, you need to reboot it. And I thought, that wasn't even a word at some stage. And I begin to think about how dramatically the world is changing. What is it we're doing with our instruction to use technology to enhance it, and all the other opportunities we have to personalize and customize learning? So instruction's not what it was. Assessment. We are having so many arguments over assessment in this country, whether it is PARCC exams, Smarter Balance for those who are watching the K-12 arena, but all of this will begin to certainly be part of the mission of higher ed as you begin to think, how is it you know your kids can do what you want them to do, whether it's an industry certificate, any of those things. So assessment really matters. And more importantly, how we use assessment. Too often we've used assessment to name, blame, and shame. We haven't used it to uncover, discover, and help others recover. And then accountability. Some people look at accountability and they say, oh, that's who we're going to blame. That's different from who's going to help own the learning. So we really do have this. So I want you to think about in your own classroom, your own department, everyone has to answer this question. What do you want kids to know and be able to do? That's absolutely important. I was telling Barb here earlier that I was an Army officer a long time ago. It's the only standards-based environment I ever really worked in, because they were really clear about what we needed to know and be able to do. And if no one ever said to me, well, you know, some of you will get it, some of you won't. We made an effort to say everyone has to know and be able to do this, and we're going to ensure that you can do that. It takes more time, we'll take more time. It takes more, whatever it takes. Now we go to instruction. Today's effective instructor is going to be someone who not only builds relationships, and I'm going to give you some examples of what good instruction is, but you think about all the tools at your disposal. When I began teaching, high tech would have been an overhead projector. The bowling alleys had them, and we wanted them in schools. But now you think about all the things that are at our disposal to personalize, customize learning. Instruction has become incredibly more complicated, but more exciting, far more exciting. I was in China, and one of the visits there, I've been there about a dozen times, I was meeting with a group of kindergartners, and I passed out bookmarks that some teachers had made to give the kids. And this one little kindergarten girl looked at me and said, would you like for me to make a bookmark? I said, yeah, make me one. Then she looked at me and says, you want in English or Chinese? And then I was struck by the largest English-speaking country. Certainly isn't us, it's India now, but someday it won't be India, it'll be China. That the world has absolutely shrunk, and we begin to think about the importance and other ways that we can incorporate instruction with other people. So that's a challenge. How do we become the most effective instructor we can to prepare kids for a world that is dramatically different than the one that many of us grew up in? Assessment still matters. But too often we have limited assessment to summary judgments. Performance tasks matters. So when we look at new rounds of assessment, it's not just about regurgitating something, it's about being able to demonstrate something. So there are new rounds of assessments, and we can now individualize those. I imagine someday with assessments, we're not all going to take assessments the same day at the same hour. We're going to take them when we're ready to take them. I think about kids going to take driver's license. We didn't all do it at the same time. We did it when we were ready. And we're going to be able to customize and personalize assessment because how we use it really matters. Accountability, I'm going to suggest we replace accountability with something even more important. How about ownership? You really care about how kids do. And it's not just about who we blame if it doesn't go well. It's, I want to ensure that these kids who I care deeply about are successful. Now, when we get these four things right, then we're going to have the word that's used in education all the time. That's alignment. Those are the alignments. So you think about in your own classroom. What do I want students to know? How am I going to ensure they can do it? What am I going to do if they can't do it? How am I going to help them? And how is it that I help them to own their learning and I can be the wind beneath their wings? So that's the challenge that we face in classrooms. Now I want to give you a quick framework. And I'm going to give you a web connection you can go for free to get a little more information. I will tell you that you see the one thing up on the screen. Several years ago, two of our researchers at Battelle for Kids, along with two business professors from the Law School of Business at Michigan, did an appreciative inquiry with dozens and dozens of teachers in Texas, Ohio, Tennessee, teachers who had had extraordinary results with kids. And we know, what is it they do that seems to account for those? And as it turns out, the framework I'm going to give you is the same framework this business professor developed to look at what do effective organizations do? What do effective CEOs do? His name is Robert Quinn. He has written 17 or 18 books, and what he will tell you is what highly effective teachers do is what highly effective CEOs do. It's what highly effective organizations do. So let me give you these very quickly. I want to go through these four quadrants, and if we could put these up here, and I'm just going to give them to you because I want you to think about it. There are four quadrants, and I want you to think about relationships in the yellow, and blue is high expectations. Do kids work harder for somebody they think cares about them? Well, that's a duh. It matters. Building relationships with people really, really matters. Effective organizations care about relationships. Effective organizations have vibrant HR departments. And it's not just creating a culture where there's fun, but it's a culture that demonstrates we care about people. I'll give you one quick example. When I was superintendent, we had a new music teacher for orchestra. And he was replacing somebody who had been there for a long, long time. And you know how it is when you follow somebody who's been extraordinarily successful. It's a difficult task at best. And I started hearing different complaints from different parents, and it was about his relationships. And I went to him after about 6 weeks, and one of the things I said to him, I said, "Hey, did you ever go to a volleyball game?" He looked at me and said, "No, I don't like volleyball." I said, "Do you know that 5 of the girls that sit in your first chairs all play volleyball, and last year they went to the state semifinals? And if you just showed up, you don't even pretend you like it. It will make a difference because they don't think you like them." He goes, "Well, I like them." I said, "Don't tell me. Your intention is not their perception." I said, "Just go to a volleyball game." Now he did. Now you know what happens because it's a way of demonstrating and communicating that we care. Powerful teachers build relationships. Now, juxtaposed with that, you see the blue. That's about getting results. You want to get results. Now, these are not necessarily at odds. Sometimes in our greatest strength can be our greatest weakness because I can tell you, relationships, you may have met somebody like this. "Oh, I just love the kids. They don't learn anything, but I love them." It's not enough. Now let's go to blue. Blue's about having results. Having high expectations for kids. Giving something back to somebody. Say, you can do better than that. Now, if we carry blue to extremes, then it's like you feel like you're at the sweatshop. Or if I say sometimes to teachers, what good is it for a kid to make 3 years of growth in math and never want to do another math problem the rest of their life? But I want you to think about it. Do highly effective organizations care about results? Absolutely. Do they measure them? Absolutely. Do they care about relationships? Yes. And if there were time, we'd talk about how you integrate these, because sometimes we can stretch too far. We don't all have natural strengths in others. Now, I want you to look at the other two. Where we have blue and yellow, I now want you to look at red and green. Red isn't any different than when I started teaching 40-some years ago. Red's about stability. It's about routine. It's about classroom management. Those still matter. So when kids walk into a classroom, they want to know, what is you going to expect of me? How do you run this thing? How does this work? Having routines. Same thing that works in business. If I'm in Hong Kong drinking a cup of coffee from McDonald's, it tastes like the one where I live near Bethel Road, because they have processes and procedures and systems to ensure that quality. Red matters. It's the reason that treasurers say, hey, you got a purchase order for that? We need routines. Good organizations have those. They have systems that allow them to replicate quality. Now, sometimes at odds with that is the green. The green's the innovation. It's the creativity. You know people who are incredibly creative. Now, sometimes the people in the red quadrant will look at the green quadrant and they say, oh my God, I don't know what they're doing. You know, they're just off on some tangent. And I got to tell you what, the people in the green category will look at the people in red and say, you know, they just count beans. They never had it. The truth of it is, effective teachers do all these. You don't have equal strengths in these. But that's where you seek out people. So if I have somebody who's incredibly creative, why wouldn't I go to them? Help me to figure this out. By the same token, every beginning teacher I've ever met, you need to figure out what you're going to do in that red quadrant. Now, I've also learned this. When I first started teaching, some of you will remember this, somebody said, don't smile till Christmas. You know what I've learned? People don't smile before Christmas. Hell, they don't smile after Christmas either. So at the end of the day, you need all of these. So think about integrating this. Now, there isn't time to go on and on about this, but I would encourage you to go to bfkconnect.org. There's a survey there that you can download and take for yourself, because it shows you what your strengths are, because you absolutely need to use your strengths to help you with the others. People that have great relationship strengths, trust me, they're able to accommodate lots of kids because that's a powerful tool for them. So you begin to think about, well, what are yours? What I will tell you unequivocally, what we found is highly effective teachers integrate all four of these. They don't ignore them. And by the same token, highly effective organizations pay attention to all four of these. So you're thinking about innovation. Think about Apple. Apple is constantly innovating. That is at their strength. What is the next thing? So as you begin to think about these, there are lots and lots of examples. I think I fly Southwest Airlines for two reasons. One is they're highly effective. They're just highly effective. But since Southwest Airlines started in 1973, they've never had a losing quarter. They get great results. They also have fun. They're relationship-oriented. They're the only airlines I get on where people will tease you. They will laugh. They don't look like they've been weaned on a dill pickle. I mean, you get the idea here. So these things matter. So there's a framework. I encourage you, when you think about your own classroom, your team, your unit, whatever area you're working in, to ask yourself, what is it we do in each of those areas? What do we do to intentionally build relationships? What structures and processes and protocols are in place to ensure we have quality? What are our results? What do we stand for? And what are we doing to encourage new ideas, new uses of things, ways to personalize, technology, all of those tools out there. So there's my second is frame. And I want to come to last, which is inspire. And I guess I'm always inspired by stories. I was in Nebraska Wednesday, and I had the chance to hear the Nebraska Teacher of the Year. And the Nebraska Teacher of the Year told this story. He's a young man. He teaches math and science at a remote high school in northwest Nebraska. But he said as a kid growing up, he grew up in extreme poverty. He lived with his mother, his sister. They were on food stamps. He said they struggled. And he talked about one of the areas they lived in where he was a third grader. And he said, I went to school. He said, I never missed school because school was the place I got something to eat. School was the place where I thrived. And he said, I got sick. And he said, for 3 days I couldn't go to school because I was really sick. And he said, what I remember is my third grade teacher, because I lived close to the school, coming to my house and knocking on the door. And she goes, you must have been sick. I got 5 or 6 books here for you because I thought you might use these. He said, I have no idea what I learned in the third grade. But he said, I've never forgotten that person who took the time to bring those books to me, that is what I remember. So it is not about just that. Ruby Payne said there are 2 things that lifts people out of poverty. It is education and it is relationships. So these are very, very powerful constructs as you begin to think about it. It's not enough to just help somebody succeed on a test, but to be a teacher and the wind behind somebody's sails matters far, far more than that. And I have a letter from a professor who teaches accounting. that I've saved. And I thought you could certainly relate to this. This is a person, Professor Skinder, I forget what university, but he taught business. His students sat for the CPA exam, and many of them struggle with the CPA exam. And he had this one lady who was worried to death about this. And here's the note he sent her. Dear blank, your husband, friends, and family love you because of the beautiful person you have made yourself, not because of a performance on an examination. Remember that. Focus on November. Concentrate on practice. I want what's best for you. You will get through this thing, Marie. I write on my test, the primary purpose has already been served by your preparation for this exam. Success doesn't measure a human being, effort does. Now, Marie, in fact, did get through that. Marie owns 6 Lexus dealerships today. She still gives Professor Skinder great deals on his new Lexus. But we build those relationships, and those are the things that inspire us. And we do things with other people. There's a wonderful study done by Adam Grant that he reports on, and it always answers this question whether or not people get better with practice. Because by and large, we get better with practice. But the question he asked in this study was, do heart surgeons get better with practice? Now, I'm going to give you my version of this. And as somebody who had heart surgery a long time ago, I now realize I asked my doctor the wrong questions. The question he asked, do heart surgeons get better with practice? And he did this at 43 hospitals. He looked at 40,000 bypass surgeries. He looked at 200 cardiac surgeons. Now, I'm going to answer it simply. Do heart surgeons get better with practice? Okay, no. Now, before you gasp, you think, oh my God, there's a but in this. There's a big but in this. The but is if they practice surgery with the same team. That team that works together reduces mortality to what typically is 3% to 1%. So do you get better with practice? Yes, with the same team. So you begin to think about our interactions with teams. Teaching doesn't have to be an individual sport, and too often it is. Collaboration works because you get better by lifting. When we look at that framework and we have these different strengths, how is it that we do this? It really, really matters. 2 last things. One is Oprah Winfrey, a couple of years ago, gave the graduation speech at Harvard. And there was a piece when I read it that really resonated with me. She said, I've interviewed 35,000 people, from miscreants to presidents to every kind of person you could imagine. And she said, they share this universal need, and that is affirmation. She goes, after it stops, when the camera shuts, they look at me and they say, was that okay? Did I do all right? Do you think that made sense? Affirmation matters. So when we think about the kind of feedback that we give people, and this is not to give affirmation when somebody has not reached expectations, but you can continue to find, because people move when you give affirmation around things. So those matter. And the very last thing, I was sitting at a luncheon about 4 or 5 years ago with a professor from, turns out, NC State, and he had just had this thing happen, so he was excited, and he just needed to tell somebody. And we often tell complete strangers all kinds of things. We do that. And it was interesting because he had won this teaching award. And he said, I taught high school English back in eastern Pennsylvania. And he said, so now I'm at NC State, I win this award. He said, there's a picture of me in the paper. And he said, I get a call from this young lady. And she goes, are you Mr. Such and Such who used to teach high school English back at, yeah, 20 years ago. She goes, well, I'm such and such, I was in your class. So he said, I made arrangements to have lunch with her. I hadn't thought about that class for a long time. I know anybody who's ever had classes understands there are classes we always want to remember, and there are some we can't forget. Now, in this case, this was an always want to remember. He said, I had this senior class who loved books. He said, we read great books, we had great discussions, and he said, I hated to see them graduate. Now, he said, when you're a senior teacher, you get invited to everybody's graduation party. He said, I don't have any money, I can't buy gifts, but I thought, what could I give them And he said, so what I gave him was a 4-page handout. 25 books we didn't get to that you need to read. Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. Short 4-sentence summary of each one. Said, you need to read these. He said, I gave everybody the 4-page handout as graduation gift. Now, he said, I have lunch with this young lady. We catch up. I'm using young lady generously. She's well in her 40s. The professor's in his 60s. And as they're talking, they finished. They caught up. He said, it was just wonderful. He said, then she got ready to leave. She goes, wait a minute. She reaches in her purse, takes out a 4-page handout that had been folded and unfolded and refolded countless times with little notes in the margin. She looked at him. She goes, you know, I read all 25 of these books. When do we get our next assignment? Teaching is the gift that keeps on giving. And I can assure you that the greatest gift you will ever give your students, that you will ever give your colleagues, is yourself. And David Brooks has a new book about character. And he says there's 2 kinds of resumes. There's the resume that we do to get jobs, and he said then there's the virtue resume. It's the kind people talk about when people are no longer around. And I would argue that that second one is the one that makes an impact. So on behalf of all the students and people whom you interface with, I'll say in absentia for them, thank you. What you do matters a great deal. Thank you.
Come on stage with me. Okay. What a wonderful way to kick off our conference. We want to express great appreciation for you for these wonderful, thought-provoking ideas to get us in the right mind frame for the work that we need to do in improving teaching and learning across the academy, across many institutions. On behalf of President David Decker, our faculty and staff here at Franklin University, and all of our visitors, I want to express our appreciation by offering you a gift, a token of our appreciation for your work here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. And I do want to say this. I have to tell you, I think that the things you do at Franklin University and the kind of economy that we have today, this is an incredibly vibrant place.
Thank you.
And Dr. Decker and Christopher and Karen and Barb and Fawn and all the people who work here and the efforts that you do on behalf to help lead kids to something is very, very powerful. And your reputation and your work continues to grow. And there's nobody any more vibrant with the flexibility, connection to business, all those things you do. So it's a real honor and privilege for me to be here.
It's good to have
thank you.
We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.